Hello, this is Speaking of Shakespeare, conversations about things Shakespearean. I'm Stephen Wittek, broadcasting from the historic Baker Building on the Carnegie Mellon University campus in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you are joining us on YouTube, you should know that this program is also available on your favorite podcast platform. This talk is with Thomas Dabbs, who is, of course, the usual host of this series. We're going to be speaking today with Thomas about his research and the podcast and teaching at Aoyama Gakuin University, which is, of course, in central Tokyo. I will also note before we get started that this series has been maintained with the support of Aoyama Gakuin Institute of the Humanities and from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, and we thank them for the support for this. What to my mind is one of the greatest podcasts to come out. There are many Shakespeare centered podcasts, of course, and a lot of very, very strong ones. But I'll say anyway, personally, Thomas, yours has been my favorite. You started, as I'm sure many people know, back in 2021 during the pandemic. This, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, this is episode 50, where you have put yourself in the spotlight. You started in 2021 with Sarah Olive. Since then, you have had just a tremendous roster of guests that has included some of the great luminaries of the field. You've had Emma Smith, Tiffany Stern, Stephen Greenblatt, of course, James Shapiro, Eric Rasmussen, and the list goes on. You've also used the podcast as a space to introduce the work of younger, up-and-coming scholars, too. So, for me, since I found out about it, the podcast has been a really great way just to sort of keep in touch with what is happening in the wider world of Shakespeare studies. I won't ask you, Thomas, who has been your favorite guest. I think it's clear, the guest who got to be co-host. That wouldn't be fair, but maybe you can begin by just reflecting on the history of the last couple of years, your life as a podcaster, and I'm wondering if there are any particular moments that come to mind.
Well, there are a lot of moments. I think this might be 51. So we have one coming out today, in fact.
You let somebody else be number 50. Okay.
I'll let somebody else be number 50, and it's a good one.
Okay.
So all of them are good. Let's see, where did it begin? During the pandemic, what we immediately experienced was a sense of alienation. We couldn't go to conferences. We couldn't even see each other in the hallways in our own institutions. And we immediately, and all across the board, realized just how much was taken away from us when we were under lockdown, and then it stretched out over a period. And I had just received a grant to invite speakers from abroad to come and speak at our university at Aoyama Gakuin, and you couldn't do it. There was no way to spend the money. So I was at that time listening to podcasts and so forth, and I'm looking at the sort of bare stage, in terms of podcasting. I think we can do this. And so we started up, and we stumbled a little bit. We tried several things. I would try to tell jokes or try to make it exciting or bubbly. And I realized that, if we just keep this conversational, normal, authentic, then that's probably the best I'm going to be able to do. And so we ran ahead, and I had some, included some friends, people I knew, people who were willing. Not everybody is comfortable with this. So I learned that. Others are very comfortable, very eager. And so we went with that for several talks. And then I started asking people who were more well-known, let's say, established scholars. And I was just extraordinarily surprised at how quickly they agreed to come on and how enthusiastic they were. And that includes the names that you mentioned and others too. Our mutual friend, David McGinnis, was one of the early interviews.
Yeah.
And David, it's just so, he's just splendid all the way through. So I guess to answer your question, what I found out doing this is that it forces me into a situation where I have to learn the whole scholar, right? It's not, and I have to learn about
Right.
how to approach their work, and it gives you a fairly good global view of the field. I have regrets, and one of the regrets that I have, the most immediate, is that I can't do more people. There's, world enough in time, and I would like to
A
do.
lot of work goes into producing uh, a single, an hour and a half, 2 hour podcast episode. Is
Yeah,
there's all the research which you mentioned, but you guys all this is another strength of the podcast is you have the man who's really behind the scenes, Thomas the Younger,
yeah,
does tremendous production work for you
yeah. Thomas Showmaker.
as well.
Yeah,
Yes,
and I've
Thomas the Younger,
Thomas the
as you call him.
Younger. That's right. We had early on. We had Thomas confusion with one of our. He didn't know which Thomas he was talking to, and I usually go by Tom. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to do this because I feel like the people that I have spoken with are probably more accomplished than I have been in specific areas, and I feel very accomplished generally in life and so forth. But it's not featuring myself is not my normal uh, comfort zone. It's not in my comfort zone. But now that I'm here, let's do it and
No,
continue.
you have actually had I think you've had an extraordinary career and a very interesting story. So let's get into that. Let me first of all say for uh, I imagine most people are not terribly familiar with your institution, Aoyama Gakuin. I am because I had the great honor and privilege of visiting Tokyo last summer, where you had me to come give a guest lecture to students. It was one of the great highlights of my academic career. Just to be in Japan, where I shared the Shakespeare VR project with some people and got to lecture about my new book. So let me just give people, I don't know what people think of when they think of Tokyo. One touchstone that comes to mind is the movie, Sofia Coppola's movie, Lost in Translation, which was actually about 20 years ago, was shot in Shibuya. And that's where you are in Tokyo. So, it's think Lost in Translation, but 20 years later, it's this Tokyo's an extraordinarily glamorous city of the future. It's so cool, very very well ordered. There is the Japanese attention to perfectionism, and Aoyama Gakuin is right on the famous Yamamoto Green Circle line. As you approach the campus, as you walk through the main gates, there is this John Wesley, because it was because of the university's history, founded by missionaries. And it looks, for the most part, there's nothing really particularly at first glance Japanese look. It looks like a standard mid-sized liberal arts college in the United States. It's not in a temple or
No,
something
no,
like that, right?
no.
Okay, so that sets up, where you are and Shibuya. So I guess the question is, how does a guy from a completely different culture, you're from Sumter, South Carolina, which is, I think you often describe it as a crossroads town in central South Carolina. How do you get from Sumter to Shibuya?
Well, Sumter was cosmopolitan for me. I grew up outside of Sumter, 12 miles. And I
Oh,
remember,
wow.
yeah,
Oh,
when I went
okay.
to school in the town, that people laughed at my accent. It was a little bit different from the accent. And you think of a
Right.
Southern accent as the same. It's the same thing. It's not. There are a lot of
Right.
things, and of
So what
course,
was the name of your hometown?
Dabb's Crossroads, and it wasn't a town. There was nothing
Dabs
equivalent.
Crossroads.
But
Oh,
everybody,
okay.
if you say the intersection of 527 and 378 and get lost and
Uh,
ask anybody in that little region in there where that intersection is, they won't know. But if you say Dabb's Crossroads,
uh.
it will. And so I descend from,
So
uh,
your town is named after your family, or it's not even a town. It's
it's not
just,
even a town.
uh,
Closest town is
but
Maysville. That's the address.
right.
But so there's no post office. It's in the country. And
So the Dabs go a long way back.
go a long way
South
back.
Carolina.
And of course, there's that history too. And not all of it is pretty, of course. And but in terms of my life and my earliest memories, it was to I loved it. I had great parents. It was very comfortable. It was very natural and wooded and very boring. And I realized early on that I just wanted to go out into the world. We wanted more. There weren't a lot of people. You couldn't strike up a baseball game or do that. There were my closest friends lived about a mile away. And try to get down there, walk down there, go on a bicycle. But anyway, I just remember not having enough people, and I overdid it because I'm in a metropolitan area now of I think around 36 million people. There's nothing but people around me, but this is very comfortable for me. I really enjoy being here. I went and I was educated. I won't go into too much detail, but I went through and did a PhD and worked in the States
at the University of South Carolina, right?
That's right. I studied with Trevor Howard Hill, and I think you have been influenced by
no
his
kidding.
culture. Yeah, he was my
advisor. His work on a game of chess. Yes, the great scholar of a game of chess.
Yeah, and not the easiest guy to work under. He's passed away now, but an extraordinarily good scholar. And he was also into computer. We'll get to this, but into computers very early on and bibliography.
Yeah.
So I was very well trained in the working scholars area, in bibliography, not as much in theory and critical reasoning. And I tried to bring that into the dissertation that I wrote that became a book, kind of combining Foucault with reception studies, a reception study of Marlowe. And that went off very well. I was very fortunate right out of graduate school to get a book published. And then things.
So it sounds like you're influenced by, it sounds like a project very much of its time. You're influenced by this new thing called New Historicism.
That's right.
With the focus on Foucault, particularly points towards that.
That's right. Said. And I wasn't dealing with those other than mentioning their names and taking an approach that, let's say, was licensed by Greenblatt in our field, but others, Foucault and other receptions theorists, there's a list of names, but I don't want to get stuck in the mud there too much. But that it worked very well in the sense that I was looking at how Marlowe was created by 19th century ideology, right? Was brought back into the canon and for us to study, and it's all a good thing. But anyhow, I was in academia and a job came open in Hiroshima University. And the job that I had just was not very happy. And the yen was very strong at that time, and the pay was a little bit eye-popping. And I thought, well, I can go over there for 3 years and retire some of my debt. And I was starting a family and so forth. And I thought, well, we can be kind of middle class, but it is, after all, a foreign country. And I was I had a beer with a buddy of mine. He said, well, they all speak English over there anyway, so just go on over there and make the money.
Was that true in Hiroshima at the time?
Nobody spoke any. I was, a day, I'm in Hiroshima a day, and I know, sushi and konnichiwa, and that's about it. And I walk over, to the famous convenience stores in Japan, which are just delightful. They've improved my life to get a tube of toothpaste. And there was nothing in there that said toothpaste, and I had no idea how to ask for it. And everybody was polite. Wow. No sense of being threatened or anything. But I bought a tube of something that I thought was toothpaste, and I thought it was this taste terrible. And I think it was. I think it was makeup.
Wasabi?
Yeah, no. I think it was makeup remover. It just everything was in a tube, and so I had to start learning Japanese, and that was a long process, but through plenty of rehearsal and so forth. And I have a lot of great stories of the humiliation one experiences, the humbling experiences of learning a language. If you're me, I'm not particularly good at languages, but I was good in piano. I played piano when I was in high school and middle school and so forth, and I learned songs through rehearsal, and that's how I did language.
You took the same approach to language.
Took the same,
You spent some time in England
yes,
at some point there as
yeah,
well. Did you live in England, or you just
yeah.
visiting?
No. I did an exchange type program. I went with a group to study at the University of London for a period when I was in undergraduate, and I probably have mentioned this several times, but that was you've done work on conversion. That was my conversion. I was
Right.
supposed to go back to Sumter, South Carolina, and be a businessman of some type because I was quote unquote good with people. Actually,
Mhm.
I'm terrible. Anytime I've ever tried to do anything that involved business or what, I'm not good. I'm not a good salesman. I'm not a good anything. And I loved this West End scene that we were exposed to immediately as a say 21-year-old guy. And I'm going, it was just this world that I had never seen before. And then we went up to Stratford and studied there for about 3 weeks and saw the whole repertoire that year. It was a great program, and it was just
Wow.
completely transformational. And that drew me into this business that we're in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So fast forward a couple of decades, you have since become, and then of course you moved to Aoyama Gakuin University, and you've become you really kind of created this niche for yourself. A big part of your work has been, as one of the chroniclers of Shakespeare studies and Shakespearean culture in Japan. And you wrote a book about your pedagogical experiences teaching this course on the Bible to Japanese students. That is Genesis in Japan, the Bible Beyond Christianity, came out in 2013, which I read just this past week, and it's such a fun read. It is really, really good. This is one of the things you say at the beginning of the book. Usually, when academics write books about courses they've taught, the implicit message is, I'm such a fantastic teacher. Look at this wonderful course that I've developed. Everybody should follow my example. That's usually right. You take what's so refreshing about the book is you take kind of the opposite track, and it's sort of this warts and all, but very, very relatable for anybody who's ever taught a university level course, just of your struggles. But you give us this insider's look on not only at Japanese culture, but also your voyage about learning about the Bible yourself. You start off, you say, you admit, I've got a quote from you. You say, I was arrogant about what I knew about the Bible. And this arrogance was a religious arrogance born of the culture I was born to, an arrogance that I could not see in myself, which is, so great, I think, that you made yourself vulnerable like that. And I really felt like I learned a lot from the book as well. And I guess one of the core observations is has to do with the difference in Japan that is made by not dealing with a Christian culture. Christianity is for the most part totally unknown, and it's such a big part of Western culture. Not to mention, and this is another point you make, just learning the English language. I think we don't really realize how this is true for Shakespeare too, but maybe 10 times as true for the Bible. How many idioms and expressions and cultural touchstones are biblical. I'll quote you again here. You say, speaking of Japanese students, they're not unchristian, and they're not non-Christian. They are not against Christianity. They're detached from it, right? You might say they're a Christian, right? Not their understanding of the Bible tossed into a volatile mix with my own thinking has jarred me into seeing the Christian world as having a marginally insane relationship with the Bible. Just great. It's really a very good read. So can you tell us a little bit then about this massive odyssey that you had you're asked to teach this course. It's been on the books forever. And the head of the department, I guess, says to you, oh, you're, from Southern California, you must know, or Carolina, pardon me, you must know something about the Bible. And you just kind of say, okay, I don't, I'm a Shakespearean, but I'll do it. And you take it from there. What happens?
Well, I'll go back. I moved from Hiroshima University, which again Hiroshima is considered a small town in Japan, even though it has 1 million people. And I got this fabulous job in 2003 here, and it's been very happy. And yes, that's right. When I came here, we had a part-time teacher who was teaching the Bible, and because of its the Methodist foundational basis of this university, which is in stark contrast with the fashion area that we're in, the Dior stores and the Gucci, the 4-story Gucci store and that sort of thing. Here we go into John Wesley, who probably would see all of this capitalism as being
John Wesley
extraordinarily...
would not approve.
No way. A lot of idolatry.
Maybe that's why he looks so angry.
Oh yeah. We just refer to him as the scary guy at the front gate. I just, when I meet my students, sometimes we go out to eat or whatever, I say, let's just meet under scary guy, and they think that's funny. But it
is kind of scary. Like he's up there looking down, looming over us. So that's it's a great picture.
Well, when I took over this course, it was something that I didn't think I could do. I had to start out by reading the Bible, and I'd never read the Bible, not the whole thing, and it's long, and it's hard, and it's not the most engaging thing to read all the way through. So we start there, and I'm going, how am I going to spit this into a class? I was given one class to do this, and then immediately found out that even with a lot of my students, the Garden of Eden was very fuzzy. The Eve maybe, but let's say Noah, Lot, and all of these stories that we somehow, I don't know, would absorb through our skin somehow, living in Christian cultures, right? And I'm going, I'm going to have to back off here and start somewhere else. And what was helpful, he was very controversial in my day, was E.D. Hirsch. I remember this whole idea of cultural
literacy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I'm going, I was critical of Hirsch back in the day because it seemed a little bit classist or, something that belonged to elite institutions, the Harvard Great Books series, that sort of thing. But there is quite
the Canon Wars,
that kind of thing. But there was a lot to it, and it was very directly applicable to this as a methodology for teaching. You want students, they're taking these classes, they're majoring in English and English literature to better their English skills, but also to internationalize themselves, to make themselves to cross cultures. And many of them will get jobs where they are in Christian culture. If they go to Europe, or if they go to North America or South America, for that matter, Australia. And I realized that this is, one of those practical courses. You can tell a joke. You can say something like, "Well, he walked on water," as far as I'm concerned, and you're perfectly almost bilingual Japanese students will have no idea where that comes from. What do you mean walk on water? Right. So I started approaching it that way. Now, it took a couple of years before I got the motors running. But using that kind of model, the cultural literacy, then I started finding that I'm doing some good here. This is working. But when I first started, it was, we just start out with, I think in the book, the firmament. They're looking at me blankly, like, what is a firmament? Give me a break. The creation story. So.
Nothing from the void and the spirit upon the waters and all. That's another thing that I really admire about your approach to you're teaching people who for the most part ESL students, and you decide kind of perversely, although I have to say I would make the same perverse decision, to teach not the New International Version or the Good News, but you taught the King James Version as well, which is
and
what
still
I
do.
love.
Still do.
And still do, which has that is in a lot of ways, well, if not Shakespearean, at least very, very Elizabethan Jacobean. It's got that that bigness of the era is
Yeah.
in the language. But I'm sure you didn't make things any easier for yourself by choosing
No.
King James, but you
No.
did decide to stick with it though,
Yeah.
nevertheless. And
Well,
how did you make that work?
well, by modifying your, you make some modifications. Now, I work generally with summaries. There's no way you can ask these students to read the entire Bible in the King James version or
Yeah.
or modern English. It's just too long.
No, I wouldn't do that with people whose first language was English.
Yeah, I know.
It's just too much. It's
so you
like,
say, okay, here are the things you need to know. I don't want you leaving this. I don't want you leaving Dabbs's class not knowing about the flood. I don't want you leaving Dabbs's class not knowing something about King David or Solomon. Certainly, when we get further in, Jesus and the Gospels and the writings of Paul. I just want you to have a grip on this somewhat, so that you're not completely naive. And by the way, if you know these things, you'll know what basically 98% of the people in the Christian world know. Not many of us are that practiced on the Song of Deborah, or I've read nothing. No one seems to understand Song of Solomon, and so I really do skip through, but we bring up excerpts in every class, examples from the King James Bible, and I will translate along the way from that English to modern English, and if necessary, throw in some Japanese words. But you have to be careful with that, because it's the languages are very divergent sometimes in their meanings and where they go. But it's taught. All of these classes are taught in English, and that's required, actually. That's what they want me here for. Everything else, of course, in my world is in Japanese, including my marriage. But getting back to the Bible, it it works. But just time and again trying to explain these things. We just recently did the Trinity, and because we have Jesus, we have the fitful single parent God, and then Jesus. And you get through that, and then we all of a sudden have the Holy Spirit, and that becomes really. And all three of these things are God. And I have my very precise students here who go, well, wait a second, this is not working out mathematically at all, right? So you have to go back to the whole Aristotelian thing, a poodle, a Labrador, German Shepherd, right? They're all dogs. And then I said, and we all know dog spelled backward is God. And the room just broke out in laughter. But these kids are so unbothered by the irreverence of teaching the Bible that is
it's not
a lot of
them,
fun.
Of course. Why should they be? They're not in any way spiritually invested in it. And it sounds like you have a lot of fun with it. You would have a totally different experience, I think, if you came to Carnegie Mellon and taught a course on the Bible. First of all, you'd have a lot more tensions to deal with. People coming in with all kinds of investments and reservations, and you'd probably have to be a little bit more negotiation, I think, to do.
I wouldn't be.
But there's something refreshing, I think, about teaching the Bible to people who, where it's a blank slate.
Yeah, I wouldn't be a good enough Christian, and I wouldn't be a good enough atheist. I would be somewhere in the middle where everybody, almost everybody exists, but there's always the one person who would come in. There have been so many modern miracles technologically in our time and just before our time and so forth. And when I think about being a complete skeptic, a complete atheist, I think, if I'd approached somebody in the late 19th century and said, well, here, I'm holding something in my hand, and I can talk to my wife who's flying across the world on the other side of the world at 30,000 feet in this thing we call an airplane, right? I can just do that right now. And they would say, listen, we have a friend who's trained in the kind of illness that you have, all right, because we think you need to have a little talk with this person because you're sounding a little on the crazy side here, Dabs.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there are a lot of things we don't know, and I'm good with that. But to get a grip on anything in what we generally call the West, you have to have some of these biblical things under your belt. And so we do have a minister who comes on and teaches Christianity. And I've had other friends who are,
but that's not you're a literature teacher, and that those boundaries are clear, even though it's a university founded by missionaries and has this legacy. You're not expected to proselytize in any way. That's
not in my
totally
remit.
outside of your deal. Yeah,
not in my remit, and actually not in the remit of the Bible too. This is one of the embarrassing things. Three quarters of it roughly is the Old Testament. I mean, it takes a long time to get through the Old Testament, the not Christian Old Testament, and I've had students who seem to be a little bit perplexed. When are we getting into this forgiveness thing? And there is forgiveness,
right? Yeah.
There is forgiveness, but when are we going to do Christian? When are we going to do the Christian thing? And it's way down the road, and let's just see what's going on here. And it points to some of the false consciousness in Christian culture about what the Bible is and how closely related it might be to modern day life and so forth. Now, all of that said, you go back and every year I see something that just astounds me in the way people were thinking in the ancient world. The
Bible is bottomless. It really is.
It's just bottomless, and it's brilliant in ways that if you think of what people were faced with in terms of day-to-day life and the challenges, and they would care enough about who they are to get things written down, to make sure they had their stories passed from generation to generation. I wondered the other day if we care that much about it, what we leave behind. And that's just highly, highly civilized, even in the midst of all of this terror, really just the terror of daily life, just trying to feed yourself, get through living in these circumstances. And then at the end of the day, you look at, or the beginning of the next day, you look on the horizon and they're the guys with the horn helmets and they're coming in to kill you. The horror of all that, that they would care enough. No,
it's a tremendous book. I mean, it's the great artifacts of Western culture. No doubt about it.
But we did just yesterday. I wanted to do one more quick one. Just yesterday, we got to love your neighbor as yourself every year. And I looked at these polite young women, mostly we're probably 75% women, and they are the nicest people in the world. And do you love your neighbor as much? And they go, no, I don't love my neighbor. That's impossible.
Ridiculous.
And then
they're nice.
Love your neighbor more than yourself. No, I don't. We're in this vertical city, right? And nobody loves their neighbor. And even my neighbors, who are the nicest people in the world, we kind of avoid each other. If I hear them going out into the hallway, I'll wait until they get down the elevator, right? And they'll do the same to me, because then we have to think of things to say to each other and so forth. But so I just, so go
I don't think I want my neighbors to love me more than they love that much.
I don't want that much love from my neighbors.
As long as they keep a respectable distance, that's fine. I don't need love. That's great. But that's one of those things, again, I like idioms that we take for granted. I wanted to get to Paul's Cross. You've done a lot of your research has focused on Paul's Cross, which for listeners who may not know, is a section of early modern London around the environs of Paul's Cathedral, the old Paul's, not the one we have now, but the one that burned down, which was a center of activity. It was where all the bookstalls in early modern London were, center of the print trade and printers. And also there was a very, very famous sort of natural amphitheater, or not quite natural. The buildings formed this amphitheater, and there was a pulpit there, and sermons would be delivered. But I always feel like with Paul's Cross, sermons, or the way we think of sermons today, sort of does a disservice to what's going on at Paul's Cross, because these are real celebrity speakers, people like John Donne, for example, most notably.
Mhm.
And the style of sermon or kind of speech or whatever you want to call it that's being delivered at Paul's Cross too is kind of different than what you would get at your local parish too. So the article that I had read, I think this is probably the first place I ever read your name or was ever introduced to you years ago. You have an essay in Paul's Cross and the Culture of Persuasion, which is a great collection of essays by my old friend Thomas Kirby and also Paul Stanwood, who I studied with. And your essay is called Paul's Cross and the Dramatic Echoes of Early Elizabethan Print. And I guess one of the core ideas is not only in this article, but across a lot of the work that you have done, has to deal with kind of a symbiosis between what's going on in the theaters on one hand, what's going on in print, and what's going on, especially at Paul's Cross. And you use the phrase, and I'm delighted by this because I think about these things very much along the same lines you do in my book, The Media Players, that this is the development really of a new broadcast medium and also the development of a public sphere. So do you want to say a little bit about, why, how do these sermons, what does this have to do with what's going on in the theater? Where's the connection? And
Yeah.
what is a culture of persuasion?
Yeah, this is a hard one, Stephen, because there are people in our field who are uh, they are perhaps rightfully against the stark materialism I'm attempting as we go beyond that essay, because you can say, okay, preaching is from a pulpit, that's kind of a stage, but there was this conflict between pulpit and stage, of course. The Puritan what are called Puritan condemnations of the theater, which what is a Puritan, who knows, we won't get into that. But
Yeah.
I'm very, very, very interested into the virtual Paul's Cross project that's done by John Wall at NC State.
Mm-hmm.
Rose Henschel has written a book that covers the influence of the cathedral. It was a big place. It was central to cultural life in London in more than just a religious way. And so
Yeah.
I'm still working on this, a project that I'm calling The Wreckage of Faith, because we all know, and I think the starting point,
Great title.
well, the starting point here are of course, Reformation, the Reformations, but the Chantry Acts, and the missing thing that Alec Ryrie has done very good work on this, and he called this mass destruction that occurred during this period, and
Right.
and it was mass destruction. So you go into these cathedrals, and also all of the attendant grounds, including the Bone Chapel or Charnel Chapel that surrounded the Paul's Cross pulpit on the northeast side of the cathedral. That was, of course, repurposed during in 1549, when Raynar Wolfe moved into that area and they removed the bones of the dead, right?
They
So,
all go into the Thames, or a lot of them go into the Thames.
yeah, well, or Finsbury Fields, which is a huge area.
Mm.
A huge area.
Yeah.
So there's so much to say about this, but you have this public sphere. You have that has been the site of folk moots and a place to meet in central London that's crowded. It's already set up
Mm-hmm.
that way. My feeling is that what happened is when the hard Reformation hit, and in 48, 49, before Mary, that cathedral, and all the way through, there were people who just didn't see the purpose of that, because so much of the cathedral is devoted to saying prayers for the dead and the little altars. And when you wipe out purgatory, you're taking a large part of the purpose of a cathedral away from the cathedral.
Right.
So what do? We have this big building here, and a lot of people want to
Yeah.
tear it down, but that's hard. It's huge. And so they do begin tearing parts of it down and repurposing Bone Chapel. You know, I can't find records of this, but removing the bones of the dead. Now there's living memory of that. People know their relatives, you know, in that in
Yeah.
the ground. Churchyard means there were graves there, and that grave was like in Hamlet, dig a hole and wrap them in a shroud and put them in if they're not somebody,
Yeah.
right? So there's this huge kind of area of the dead that's not the churchyard of our that we know, then that's gradually become surrounded by bookstores. And I think
Hmm.
there was an intentionality. I can't show it, but I know there was a relationship between Raynor Wolfe and Cranmer, Thomas Cranmer. Now, they would not have been in the same circles, but I think when before Mary, in about 49, they could see that here we have the great mouthpiece of the Reformation is the Word of God. And we can build this place up, and here we have the pulpit, and here we have the dead to remind everybody of where it all ends, right? This could be it. This could be how we use this cathedral. And yeah, we can use the interior for our sermons and St. Faith's underneath. We can still do this, but there's the area where we can spread the word, right? And you have those innovative sermons from Hugh Latimer to John Donne, you know, on out. However, unintended consequences. I don't want to go on too long about this, but unintended consequences. When you develop a market for print, when you get literacy, you get, for the first time that I can see in English speaking history, you get people who are coming to hear the word of God who have read, right? They have read portions of the Bible or have read whatever was published, and they can check the preacher while he is talking. And there's a dramatic, so they come in with foreknowledge, where it's in the past you just talk to the people and tell them the story of King David, tell them the story of Jesus. But
In a
now that
much more dogmatic way, you
you
know.
can do whatever you want, you can set it up however you want, but then you have a public that's part of a ongoing debate in the Reformation among Protestant preachers. So that's dramatic. But when you have all those people there, why not give them a translation of Ovid's Metamorphoses, right? Which, you know, done by, you know, just brilliant translation. Why not give them a history of England or give them Plutarch and just translate it and start selling these books, and you get pleasure reading. And immediately when you see this you see dramatists in the 70s, when these big theaters start popping up here and there. In the 70s, you see this relationship between what people are playing. Now, goes to Martin Wiggins' fine catalog of books, and of course, Peter Blaney recreating the churchyard back in the 90s. However, you see immediately it's Ovid. It's coming straight from books that were being sold all over London, but where was the main area? This was Paul's Cross and Paul's Cross Churchyard. So playwrights were figuring out, if you give people what they know, right? We have Mario Puzo who writes a book. You already have an audience. Let's do a movie, right?
Let's do a movie about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the unintended outcome, that this theater, the source material for theater, was really coming from books, new printed books in English. And so this is very abbreviated, but in the 90s, early 90s, late 80s, whatever, whenever Shakespeare was coming in, and Marlowe and those guys, they already had this infrastructure. They had theaters that they could fill, and they had a way of doing, the Japanese would say. They knew how to do this. You take books that people know. Romeo and Juliet is a known story in this, you know, circulating around London in Paul's Cross Churchyard, 30 years. And something happened there that didn't happen, as far as I can tell, and anybody who is listening to this can correct me. I don't see it anywhere else in Europe, where you have these large public theaters that had such a relationship with the theater at court also.
The print market.
Yeah.
There really is symbiosis. Really is
There
the
was
right
this
word. But
symbiosis and was completely unintended. The preachers didn't want that. They weren't supporting popular drama. And, the
but there
opposite
you
sometimes,
but
so
they helped unintentionally build the market. What really the sort of lightning bolt moment for me in this argument, which I find very persuasive, is when you teach Shakespeare, one of the things that's often said about Shakespeare is that he's a magpie and that he's borrowing from all sorts of sources and remixing and because they're running a repertory system and there's a constant turn and he's kind of grabbing things from everywhere. And of course that's true. But what your argument makes clear is another important part of the picture is that he's just not kind of randomly grabbing stories out of anywhere. He's building on this market that's already been developed, and building on things that are popular in print and moving them over, especially things like Ovid and all of these Italian stories that are being printed, like those. There's an available storehouse there that his public's already kind of been conditioned. The interest has already been built, and he's building on that. I think that's fantastic, and I look forward to what was the title of your fabulous title?
Wreckage of Faith, and
Wreckage on Faith. Okay, well, stay tuned for
wreckage of
of Faith.
Yeah, and
right. Well, when that comes out, I'll have to interview you again, and you can tell us more about it.
We might have to wait for that, but yes,
uh-huh.
but there is a wreckage. There was the wreckage of the Reformation, the destruction of altars and other buildings, and also there's that very, very ugly scene of the churchyard and the people who were put there and bodies coming back up. And of course, we can tie that to Hamlet in another
right.
Yeah. So,
right.
But we'll see. We'll see if I can find somebody who wants to put it out.
As a digital humanist myself, you mentioned the Virtual Pulse Cross project, but you yourself have your own digital projects. In fact, you were the editor-in-chief of the Journal of the Japanese Association for the Digital Humanities, a role I think you've just recently stepped down from. And you've got a pretty substantial digitization project going on at Aoyama Gakuin University, the Digital Access Project. Could you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in DH and new work? I don't know anything about this, but you mentioned in your email you've got new work on AI as well. So I would like to hear about all of that.
Ooh, well, I think both of us are part of the forthcoming SAA seminar on this that Don Rodriguez is setting up on AI in the
I am. I don't think I am.
Oh, you aren't? Okay. All right. Well, anyhow,
or if I am, somebody should say I'm happy to. I'm doing a seminar on public making at the upcoming SAA that I'm very excited about.
Well, I kind of wish I was part of yours, because I'm trying to write an abstract for this one. And the problem is, and I'll get to what you asked, the problem is when you are asked to comment on AI, you are obsolete before you get off. It's like buying milk at the store and it goes sour before you get home. You just don't know what's
best before date.
3 months from now, the whole thing can change. So I'm very much concerned about that. What I'm thinking, and what I've been thinking about for years, is that if it's not online, then it doesn't exist in terms of training in a large language model or whatnot. So what is not online? An enormous amount of archival material, and so
especially manuscript archival material.
Yeah. So the little stone that I'm carrying to the Cathedral of Learning is a collection that we have at our university of Bibles that are. We have one that's incunabula. We have 16th century Bibles and 17th century that were purchased and sort of forgotten about.
This is the Digital Access Project.
This is the Digital Access Project that I was doing here. more as a work sample. I mean, they're bigger collections than ours, even smaller collections that they're bigger, but this is how you do it. And so we started out working with the digital access team at the Folger and digitizing our text and then sending the images. And they're up at the, still now at the, no, they're not up, but that's been discontinued. But at the beginning, the idea was for smaller collections to digitize their work and maybe develop a relationship with some of these, world-class institutions like the Folger, and
Right.
that can, have the viewing platform, the triple IF compliant viewing platform, and the ability to show and very much zoom in and see, the specifics of these images, which is sometimes better than the naked eye, really, if you were in the archive itself. Now they've gone another direction at the Folger, and that's, I don't think that's the best way to go, but the thing is, the good news is that these viewing platforms have become more, the ability to set them up has become easier, more out of the box.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're going next year with this. We're going to we've worked with the library, and we'll be able to provide viewing access, I'm hoping within the next 18 months, of our little collection, and basically write up what we did as a work sample for other people who may be interested in their collections, and putting these little treasures that are out there up online for whatever purpose.
That is so great. And you have some really interesting rare Bibles at Aoyama, at the university, that I take it have been there for like way back from the missionary days, right?
Yes.
Of the founders, right?
Yes. And it's very arbitrary. I could go on for some time about that, but it would be, for instance, the oldest book that we have is a Jerome Bible, Biblia Latina, which is not a Gutenberg, but it's in that range of Bibles that were printed during that time, and it's a beautiful work. We had a missionary here whose daughter, now this would go back to maybe the 50s. His daughter was killed in a car accident, and he gave that book to our library in her memory. And it didn't work very well because but so we brought that back out and put that up on our website and so forth. Because that was his will, and the book is then has another reason to exist out there. But when it's stuck in an archive, and it's not easy in a Japanese university to get access to a physical archive, they're very well protected and very well taken care of. But for instance, the collection, the great Shakespearean collection at Meisei University, is not the easiest place to gain access to. They've gotten much better about it this year, but the thing is, they're very protective of their material, and to the degree that you don't, it's hard to see any of it. Right. So
yeah, next time I go to Japan, I want to go to Meisei University and find out exactly what's going on. Because they have how many folios there? Like 11,
was it
right? Or something like that?
I think there were 12, and now it's 10. I think, and I may be wrong. And the irony is that to get that access, I would put you in touch with one of two scholars I know who are not Japanese. So I was laughing with one of my friends, a colleague at another university who's Japanese, and he said, I couldn't get access to it when I tried, and some years ago. But well, for instance, Eric Rasmussen has access to it, and John Jowett has recently visited, and they were very gracious and very open, and so, with recommendations of someone like that, I think it would be just fine.
Right. Well, if those guys
Probably
can't
not
get
with my
access, then
recommendation.
nobody is going to get access. Those are like the two of the very, very top, textual scholars in the world.
Yeah, and others also have had access, but it's something that can be set up.
Right.
But me making a direct call wouldn't help at
Yeah.
all. I'm in.
I mean, I'm more interested. I've seen many folios. I'm less actually interested in the folios. I'm more interested in the whole. Meisei is kind of shrouded in mystery.
It is.
And I'm interested in how exactly so many folios ended up at, which is Meisei is, as I take it, not one of the major universities in Japan, right?
No,
It's
there's really no
this
reason.
kind of obscure place. Yeah.
They had a
But they've
strong.
got outside of the Folger, they've got more folios than anybody else in the world, I believe.
Yep. They had one strong man who came in there, and he was one of these guys who was going to get things done. They had some money, and he says, "Well, we're going to have a department of English literature, and we need books." And he started buying up things, and they had the money at that time, and it just happened to be there at that time. And it turns out there were very, very good investments. However, it you would expect something like that maybe at Keio or University of Tokyo, maybe Waseda, but that it happened at Meisei. So
See, this is the kind of stuff that and it's a great segue to the next thing I wanted to ask you. As I was saying in the introduction, you've sort of developed this niche for yourself as one of, maybe not the only, but one of the leading experts on just sort of Shakespeare in Japan. You've got a recent article, which is another great read in Cahiers Elizabethians, called The Theater of the Confused, about this. It's called Waiting for Will. It sounds like this very strange production. It's Waiting for Will, which is sort of a play on Waiting for Godot, and it's two older actors. And then you also have an essay called Playing with Shakespeare in Japan, which is a more comprehensive look at adaptations. And I think you co-authored this with some students, I believe, too. Everything Shakespearean adaptations in Japanese culture, from everything from stage productions to novels to manga and anime and all that. But can we start with Theater of the Confused? I love it. The central idea is this notion that in Japan, like we think of confusion as this kind of derogatory thing, as in Lear damnation, confusion. But in Japan, there is sort of the benefit of the confused. And that's kind of your entryway into your description of your kind of hilarious experience with this production. So, what's so great about confusion?
well, you're in an ordered society when you're in Japanese society, and so confusion at times is invited. It's they use their word, like we would say, a happeningu. Something happens and it's delightful. And I didn't put this in the essay, but I was at an izakaya, in one of those indoor outdoor places years ago with a friend of mine, and these little rickety tables and chairs and so forth, and these what are called salarymen after work will go there and have drinks and deal with their stress or whatnot. And this guy took a bit drunk, and he just fell out of the chair, knocked the table over, and everything. Right? And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's not going to be good, And the owner came out, and everybody at the table, including the white collar workers, all together started cleaning things up, and there was a joy in it. And the owner wasn't upset. That's just part of doing business. That happens every night, I guess. Somebody falls out of their chair and knocks the table over. And it's very welcome and received, I think, because so much of the rest of your life is so ordered, right?
Right.
And so my colleague and friend Shoichiro Kawai at the University of Tokyo is a dramatist and as well as a translator, and he's very famous in these areas and extraordinarily brilliant. He has a series called the Kawai Project, and you can see the poster behind me, the red poster. That was the Waiting for Will. I went to another of his productions last summer, which was brilliant. that had, and very hard. Now these are in Japanese, and it's difficult and on a number of levels. They're very sophisticated. But the one that I was talking about in that article is his kind of collusion between Shakespeare and Beckett, Samuel Beckett,
Yeah.
the theater of the absurd, and that's where I took the title from, the theater of the confused, where he, at one and the same time, recovers a sort of history of, in Japanese, what's called the Shogekijo, the little theater movement of the 60s, 70s, and actors from that movement were playing old men and trying to remember Shakespeare. And so a lot of it has to do with, old guys trying to remember their days as actors and their lines and so forth. And it was just brilliantly woven together with references to what he would say is the established canon of all the Shakespearean plays. So
wow,
I didn't catch all the references.
So there is this flood of, it's in Japanese, first of all, and
That's right.
but the kind of the point is you get overwhelmed with all of these references. They're coming at you so fast and hard that you realize no one's going to be able to hit everything.
That's right.
There's a pleasure in just sort of having the confusion wash over you.
And there's a playfulness in it too. It's a game. What can you remember? What the whole thing is very interactive, just in terms of its script, in the sense that it's playing with you. What do you remember? Now, this is a select audience, not an elite audience, a select group of people who know their Shakespeare pretty well.
Right.
And now they had the advantage of being schooled in Shakespeare in the Japanese language. So I haven't read the Shakespearean canon in Japanese. My goodness, nowhere close. But I know enough to say, okay, that's from Lear, and that's from Romeo and Juliet, and so forth. But I could see the larger picture. I think the schooled Japanese person probably took away much more than I did. But you can see what's going on, and and the acting was just superb. It was, and I compared it with an old Beckett production that I'd seen back on Tottenham Court Road in London. That was
directed by Beckett himself.
And the San Quentin players, and the famous guy there is Rick Clutchy, who was in prison at San Quentin. For those of people who don't, a little Americana, San Quentin it's almost a synonym for prison. Sing Sing, San Quentin. Maybe now Rikers.
And Johnny Cash did an album at San Quentin.
That's right.
That's right.
Part of that tradition. Part of the tradition that you say, okay, things have gone very badly in your life, right? And there's a seedbed for Johnny Cash and for drama. And Rick Clutchy saw that and began the workshop, the San Quentin workshop. And as far as I can see, it's one of the most rehabilitating things that prison has to offer, if someone gets interested in that sort of thing. But Clutchy got out and traveled and met Beckett in Germany, and was directed by Beckett. And I think I saw that Beckett production in an underground theater, a little theater in London.
So as your listeners may beginning to understand that, this article is much more than just a review of a play, right? You pull in all these different strands of your experience seeing an early production of it wasn't Godot, it was another Beckett play in London. You give us a little potted history of Japanese avant-garde theater, pull in those strands, and it's all and also it begins with this kind of madcap story of it's the middle of summer in Japan and you're all sweaty and you don't know what to wear, and a real joy to read, and that was just 2020. 2023 has been a good year for you too, and you also I mentioned playing with Shakespeare in Japan, which you wrote for the Routledge Companion to Global Literary Adaptation in the 21st Century. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do. I want to give credit. I want to give credit where credit is due, because I'm hardly the archivist in that. The two scholars. Well, my student Reina Endo has done an enormous amount of collecting material in terms of the theater scene, and not the mainstream big theaters. There are some very highly funded theaters in Japan, but there's a lot of Shakespearean activity that she's kept records of. And that's the only reason I know about this. I mean, they're all over the place, these little groups, and sometimes university affiliated, sometimes privately funded, sometimes publicly, they get public money. And she's writing a dissertation right now on that. So she has all that information. I can bring it in and throw it into a theoretical apparatus, and that's that part. My other colleague, Kyoko Matsuyama, is she's a professor at Komazawa University, and is an expert on Japanese appropriations in media, in mass media, including print novels, but also manga and anime. And recent things that have been part of the streaming online production. So she sees where Shakespeare is being adapted. Appropriation is a difficult word. I'm not, but it's appropriated to the anime genre, and usually for young audiences, and largely young women who enjoy these romantic stories from The Tempest or Romeo and Juliet, and they do anything they feel like doing with it. So there's no sense. We argue. I'll just very quickly that there's a sense of play there, and the word in Japanese is asobi gokuro, play for the sake of play, and it can be very serious. It can be, but play for the sake of play that we think is distinctly Japanese, although we get this all over the world, is something that is a cultural value in Japanese production, and part of the character, I think. So basically, we're saying that that Shakespeare people, the iconic Shakespeare for these types of audiences is very far away. That you can do anything you want. And also, I don't want to, there is a feeling out there that there might be some kind of cultural colonization going on, right? Here's our Shakespeare, and read them and enjoy them. The West says to the East, right? But in Japan, Japan has never been a proper colony. In fact, the converse. And from the very beginning,
of course,
Meiji Shakespeare, and I've cited, thankfully, Alexa Jovan and Adele Lee have done some work on this recently, so I could cite them. This is a major country that, in fact, has a history of being the dominant culture. When Shakespeare came to Japan in the Meiji period, it was Japanized, to use the word they used, right off the bat. There's no real hesitation in the history of Shakespeare in Japan. So what you see when you see Shakespeare in Japan is very willfully imported, just like Starbucks or anything else, and then it's turned into something Japanese after.
So it's not quite correct if I follow the argument. One shouldn't think about Shakespeare in Japan along the same lines as we think of Shakespeare in India, to take an example, where there's a colonial history where it was, brought in, and people were, it's more been brought in on more of a voluntary sort of basis.
Yes.
Given that, then I'm curious to know. Maybe this is an impossible question to answer, but I'll ask it anyway. How would you characterize the idea of Shakespeare in Japanese culture? Like, what does, you mentioned connections to romance and love stories, that sort of thing, or what does Shakespeare mean when he's invoked in Magna and stage adaptations?
Something very culturally important in the West, a word that you can say, like a taxi driver. Just started, I was on a longer ride, and he just started asking me what I did. And and I told him I taught Shakespeare at the university. He knows my university is very well known in Japan because of its location. It has a good reputation too.
Yeah.
And he said in English, to be or not to be, So he
Oh,
had.
wow. So everybody knows that.
Now
Okay.
that said, there's not much after that because literature is not taught in secondary schools in Japan. So
Right.
you're not going to run into literary study until you get to university and major in a literary field. That could be Japanese literature, that could be French or Spanish, or English, or English and American literature is the name of my department. So that takes out a lot when you take out secondary schooling. However, after that, of course, creative artists are going to see how much raw material you have in Shakespeare, just like Shakespeare saw the raw material in his sources, right?
Of
So,
course, keeps on going.
and they have a little something with the Shakespeare thing because really it's associated with young people with love. They missed the ending of Romeo and Juliet and just got this. Okay, Shakespeare is sort of equal to Romeo, sort of equal to love, and so it's shallow in that way, but then it gets very, very, very much more profound as you go in. And of course, there are literary scholars who are Japanese who, not so much of my generation, but above me, who may have had a little more, post-Victorian. The Englishness of Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is a great icon. There may have been there's a good bit of that may have existed in certain circles. There was a Globe Theater that turned into it's kind of an interesting story. They built a Globe Theater to do Shakespeare, but it kind of became an idol theater, a theater for like K-pop.
Really?
Yeah. So I want to look into
K-pop idol, not a cult, but like
not a cult. No,
that
no.
kind of idol, right?
Shakespeare,
Okay.
no. Idol, yes.
Right.
You can just think you can fill this place up with people.
Uh-huh.
And so I need
That's
to.
it. That is a great story. Was that in Tokyo?
That's in Tokyo, yeah. And I don't know enough
Yeah.
about it. Sarah Olive
Uh-huh.
knows a lot about it. But it's considered kind of a tragedy for us. Shakespeare
Uh-huh.
out idols in, these pop idols.
Right. Yeah.
And I find it kind of funny, just at a distance,
Yeah.
because you can just see the practical benefits of having your
Sure.
so
It's kind of fitting in a way. I mean, it was, the Globe was a popular theater. It's about, you got to go to where the audience is. It makes perfect sense from a certain perspective.
yeah. So I do want to make it very clear, though, that I have really no expertise in the archival understanding of even 21st century Shakespeare in Japan or even Tokyo, because so much
Right.
is happening. Now I get bits and pieces, but these scholars that I worked with do.
Mm-hmm.
But one's in one kind of subspecialty and one's in the other. And then I
Mm-hmm.
sort of brought everything together. And I'm bringing some knowledge in too, but it was a nice thing to collaborate on, and that was fun.
Yeah, and for listeners, again, that volume is entitled "The Rutledge Companion to Global Literary Adaptation in the 21st Century." It's got a really cool cover of that book. I have cover envy.
Yeah,
Thomas, I notice we are well past the hour mark here, and I've covered most of the major territory that I wanted to cover. Is there anything that I have missed or anything you would like to add before we part ways for the time being?
I think we've gotten it here. Yeah, I'm looking at a list of
We
notes that I made. I wanted to remind
okay.
I was so afraid you're going to ask me about an art. If you publish, you know this. You published an article 10 years ago. You forget what you said,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
I've gotten challenged
Yes.
in sessions and said, "Well, you said this, and then later you said that," and I said, "Well, I thought this then, and I thought that later." I changed my
I've
mind.
evolved. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and actually, I'd forgotten that I'd written either one of those things.
Oh. Well, those two, not the ones from 2023, certainly not yet.
No, those are fresh. Those are fresh. And I have another one. Oh,
Right.
I should add, I have another one coming out from a Bard Graduate Center in the spring on making a connection between the mechanicals in the Midsummer Night's Dream, the workmen, and the office of the Revels, the people who worked in the Elizabethan office of the Revels. And
Right.
there have been other scholars who've seen this. I go more in, including Anita Sherman, who's written a good article on how we remember things, why we don't remember the office of the Revels the same way as other things from the period. But I go into, again, very hardcore materialistic, trying to draw relationships between that court production in Midsummer Night's Dream and the office of the Revels, and the material basis of that, the people who worked on the plays. So
Right. A much misunderstood office in a lot of cases. My guiding light on all of that is always Richard Dutton, who's whose book Mastering the Revels, I think, is a good
it's right
North
behind
Star.
me. It's right behind me.
And so good.
Streitberger too.
But people, it always kind of bugs me when people describe the Master of the Revels as a censor. I think to characterize that office just purely, to think of it as state censorship. I mean, it's kind of half true. There's a censorship function, but if you look at the manuscript for Sir Thomas More, you can see how the Master of the Revels was really, well, first of all, it's a patronage appointment. He's making money off the plays, right? So he's got a vested interest in the success of the theater and helping the players out, and doesn't want to get his nose sliced or anything. Has to make sure that nothing's causing any trouble, but is definitely a partner in some sense in the theatrical industry.
Oh yeah, there was this strong. It sort of eclipses everything. This idea of censorship, Elizabethan censorship through the '90s in particular, and there was. There's some fabulous scholarship from that period, but then second look, and this is helped a good bit by Martin Wiggins' catalog. You start seeing relationships between the Revels office and the players, the troops, and the theaters, the early theaters. We don't want to say anything that's going to be anti-Queen, but what we want is to entertain her and her guest. Number one, we better be good, and so that just raises the bar. And how do we know if we're good? Let's play this thing in public, see what the public thinks. We can run this thing instead of a dress rehearsal. And of course, they had rehearsals inside the Revels office, but man, let's take it to the street and see if it works. And nobody at court seemed to have any trouble with that, And so with the people, the tradespeople who worked inside the office or who shipped goods there were part of my focus too. This is Quince is a carpenter, and they needed carpenters. And so it may or may not work, but we'll see. It's coming out in the spring.
Okay, good. Let us know. We'll put that on the list. That's good.
Okay.
Very good. Well, thank you, Thomas, for letting me co-host Speaking of Shakespeare. This has been a lot of fun. If there's anything ever I can do for you, please send just an email away. I can't wait. I love talking to you, and to be continued.
Okay.